US consumer prices may have resumed their inflationary spiral. UK inflation is set to accelerate to the fastest pace in 10 months. And even as the European Central Bank warns of a protracted economic slowdown, German confidence is expected to rise. This is the Economic Focus for the week of April 14th. I'm Fran Neagle. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg expect the March US consumer price index rose 0.3%, paced by higher fuel costs. Prices were unchanged in February, allowing breathing space for the Federal Reserve to cut rates by 0.75 of a percentage point. Michael Cuggino is president of the Permanent Portfolio of Funds. He's concerned about the risks inflation may pose to growth.
So the trend is to lower interest rates now, and what that means is more and more liquidity, potentially, if U.S. growth does slow, chasing fewer and fewer goods and services. That, by definition, is inflationary. I think inflation is understated right now, and I think it's a risk, probably one of the biggest risks, along with the political environment we're in the '08 elections, to the economy, to investments generally, and to economic growth right now. So I think it is a concern.
On Wednesday, the Fed publishes its Beige Book survey of regional economic conditions. Other highlights from the US include retail sales, business inventories and producer prices, as well as industrial production and the Philadelphia Fed's General Economic Index. Two gauges of the US housing market, the National Association of Home Builders Wells Fargo Index of Builder Sentiment and housing starts are also released. Consumer price inflation is also on the agenda in the Eurozone, with the release of revised figures for March. Economists expect prices rose 3.5%, the highest rate since June 1992 and well above the European Central Bank's 2% target. The bank held rates at 4% at their April meeting to quell inflation pressures. In Germany, the four economic institutes that advise the government released their twice-yearly joint forecast for growth on Thursday. And before that, the ZEW Centre for European Economic Research reports its April Index of Confidence amongst investors and analysts. Sentiment in Europe's largest economy is expected to have risen for a third month, adding to signs that Germany is weathering the euro's appreciation and the US-led global slowdown. Still, ECB President Jean-Claude Trichet warned of risks to growth in the euro region economies.
The risks relate mainly to the financial market turbulence, which could last longer than initially thought and could have a broader than currently expected impact on the real economy. Moreover, downside risks also stem from the dampening impact on consumption and investment of further unanticipated increases in energy and food prices, as well as from protectionist pressures and the possibility of disorderly developments owing to global imbalances.
Further evidence of Europe's economic activity may be found in industrial production, producer price inflation, trade and construction data. The ZEW survey of Swiss investor confidence is expected on Thursday. The UK saw a third cut in interest rates since December on April 10th, as policymakers put aside concerns about faster inflation to focus on limiting a slowdown. Consumer price rises hit a 9-month high in February, driven by higher gas and electricity prices. Economists surveyed by Bloomberg expect a further increase to 2.6% when price data is published on Tuesday. Richard Lambert is Director General of the Confederation of British Industry and a former Bank of England policymaker. He spoke after the decision to cut interest rates.
The statement that accompanies their decision is actually really interesting. What they say is that, there's a double risk. On the one hand, they're really anxious that inflation being above target, inflation expectations could start to rise, credibility undermined. But then they also say that credit conditions are deteriorating and getting tighter, and they're concerned that this time next year, as capacity builds up in the economy, there's a risk that the inflation could fall below the target. So they're trying to steer a middle course.
The UK also sees producer prices, retail sales and house prices from the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Unemployment figures and borrowing data are also released. The Bank of Japan publishes the minutes of its March monetary policy meeting on Monday. Interest rate decisions are expected during the week in Serbia, Brazil, Turkey and Mexico. ECB policymakers speaking in the week include President Jean-Claude Trichet, Axel Weber, Lucas Papademos, Gertrude Temple-Gugurel, Nicholas Garganas and Athanasios Orphanides. Fed speakers include Janet Yellen, Charles Plosser, Donald Cohen, Richard Fisher, Jeffrey Lacker and Eric Rosengren. That's the Economic Focus. I'm Fran Neagle.